In this video, we're going to be having a conversation with our distributions manager, Christopher Woodward, on all things distributions related for self-directed IRA holders. Let's start with a very basic primer. Let's imagine I have no experience with self-directed IRAs or retirement accounts in general. What is a distribution?
So as you sort of mentioned earlier, a distribution is typically happening in the end of the life cycle of an IRA. You put money in at the beginning, you move it around, make investments, generate a return, and then when you're older, retired, typically, you'll draw upon that account and use that money for any purpose. That last step is a distribution. It's the money leaving your account, typically going to you.
Okay, so generally people take distributions when they've entered retirement age, generally later in the life cycle of an IRA. What if I want to take a distribution, just 4 years into having an IRA? Can I do that? Are there any consequences to that?
So you can certainly do that. Contrasted with something like a 401k that has extensive rules about when you can take distributions that your employer may put into effect. An IRA, it's your money all the time. So if you make a contribution on Monday and a month later you decide that you need that money for your own purpose, you can take that money out immediately. There may be penalties for taking money out before you reach certain criteria, and it will be tax reported in all cases and may carry tax consequences in many cases, but you can always take your money out.
Okay, that's good to know. Can you tell me about or a bit about those penalties, taxes that you mentioned? How, if I wanted to avoid those, how would I avoid those?
Yeah, so a pre-tax IRA, a traditional SEP or simple, when the money leaves your IRA and goes to you, and that's a distribution, as we've discussed, that's tax reported, and for that pre-tax IRA is typically included with your ordinary income for the year. Additionally, in a couple situations, most notably if you haven't reached retirement age of 59 and a half, you'll pay a 10% penalty on that early distribution. There are some other categories of distributions that may carry different penalties, but those are a little bit more niche, typically something like you've contributed too much and you need to take some out.
So you mentioned the early distribution penalty, and I've heard that um, if I'm a first-time home buyer, there may be ways for me to get around that early distribution penalty. Can you tell me whether that's true and if there are any other types of similar situations that fall under that umbrella?
Yeah, there are a surprising number of exceptions to the early distribution penalty. The most obvious, if you reach the age of 59 and a half, it's no longer an early distribution, no penalty applies. And while this isn't something that we necessarily plan to happen, if you die, your beneficiaries will not pay that early distribution penalty either. Additionally, if you are permanently disabled, you will not have to pay an early distribution penalty. As you've mentioned, one of the most common exceptions to the early distribution penalty that anyone might qualify for is that first-time home purchase exception. There are a couple others. If you have certain medical expenses, you may be exempt from that penalty. Higher education expenses, you can take distributions upon the birth of a child or adoption. As long as they're within certain thresholds and criteria, you can appropriately inform the IRS that while it looks like the early distribution penalty may apply, it wouldn't in that case.
Great. That is good to know. That definitely seems like something I should probably check with a trusted advisor before I go ahead and definitively do that. But another thing I've heard about is required minimum distributions, that once you reach a certain age that you have to start withdrawing funds from your account. Now, why would that be? Shouldn't I just be able to keep saving?
While you can contribute to your IRA if you have earned income, you do have to eventually start taking money out of it. It is a retirement account, and the IRS does want you to use those monies for your retirement. The taxman wants his due, and it's done in the form of a required minimum distribution. When you reach the age of 73, you will need to start taking periodic distributions from your account at an ever increasing percent. So it starts out pretty low. You only need to take a small percent out of your account. And as you get older, you need to start taking more and more as a percent of that account out.
Okay. What happens if I don't take my RMD?
If you don't take your RMD, the IRS does impose a penalty on that. In previous years, it was a very strict penalty, 50% of the amount that you hadn't taken out. It's been reduced with the passage of the Secure Act 2.0 to a 25% penalty, and this is reduced further to only 10% if it's corrected timely within 2 years. So if you fail to meet your RMD, but you take it out as soon as you realize that, you'll typically only be penalized at 10% of the amount you should have taken.
One last question. So, with most IRAs offered by a bank or brokerage, most traditional securities, stocks, bonds are relatively liquid. It's easy to sell, for example, if I need to make a required minimum distribution. With a self directed IRA, I have many more options. I can invest in precious metals, real estate, private equity. Let's say that my portfolio is made up primarily or exclusively of real estate or private equity assets. And then I turn age 73 and I have to make an RMD. What do I do in that situation? To me, it seems like it might be a little bit more challenging of a process to make sure that I'm able to make that RMD for the IRS.
Yeah, like I'd mentioned earlier, you can take money out of your IRA at any time and in any form. Typically, you'll expect to receive a check, for example, of a certain amount, and that'll be the income that you get from your IRA. But even if your investments are illiquid or they have a lockup period, or for whatever reason you just don't want to do a distribution of cash, you can do what's called an in-kind distribution. In this in-kind distribution, instead of cash being delivered to you from your IRA, it will be ownership of an investment. Imagine a real estate investment where your IRA owns 100% of a given property. If your required minimum distribution comes out to be about 10% of that property's value, you can take an in-kind distribution of a portion of that property, changing title on that property from 100% your IRA to 90% your IRA and 10% you. This change of ownership, that 10% of that piece of property, is included as a distribution. It's part of your ordinary income for the year and can satisfy your required minimum distribution.
Uh, One question did occur to me as you were saying that. Because I own, let's say, 10% of a real estate property in my personal accounts, my personal name, can I start to live in that or use it as a vacation home?
Not until it is entirely out of your IRA. And neither can you simply say that 10% of it is just the master bedroom. I can use that, but I won't step foot in the rest of it. No, while your IRA owns a portion of that property, you cannot live in it, use it as a vacation home, etc.
Okay. Thank you for crushing my dreams, Christopher. That
Sorry.
is, yeah, thank you. That's all the questions I have for now. Now, for the viewer, if you have any questions about your personal situation, we recommend talking to a trusted tax or financial advisor to make sure you comply with all of the IRS rules. If you'd like more in-depth information about SDIRA distributions, read through our distributions blog post. We'll link that in the description below. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.